Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. British-Iranian Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, who was imprisoned in Iran for 6 years, has arrived back in the UK and reunited with her family. Anousheh Ashouri, who was detained in Iran for 5 years, has also been freed and arrived back in Britain.
It's incredibly emotional. Sort of last night, waiting for that plane to touch down, it's a bit like waiting for Father Christmas to come on Christmas morning. You know, it's just, we couldn't wait. It's so exciting. And then knowing that they've had that first night together.
Here in Ukraine, the search goes on for survivors trapped in the rubble of a theatre in Mariupol bombed by Russia. Around 1,000 people may have been sheltering inside the building's basement. A local MP said it had withstood the bombing. UK military intelligence says that the Russian advance has stalled on all fronts. And refugees continue to flee Ukraine to the safety of neighbouring countries.
And coming up on the BBC News Channel, world champion Max Verstappen says there's no healing to be done, despite last year's controversial end to the Formula One season.
Hello and welcome to the BBC News at 1. British-Iranian Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, who was imprisoned in Iran for 6 years, has arrived back in the UK and been reunited with her family. Anousheh Ashouri, who was detained in Iran for 5 years, has also been freed and arrived back in Britain on the same flight. There were emotional scenes at RAF Bryce Norton in the early hours of this morning as Ms Zaghari-Ratcliffe was met by her husband and daughter. Our diplomatic correspondent James Landau reports.
The pain of parting is nothing to the joy of meeting again. This was the moment Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe was finally reunited with her 7-year-old daughter Gabriella and husband Richard. A family torn apart for 6 long years. A family once more complete. So too for Anousheh Ashouri, the British-Iranian businessman who'd also been freed. An emotional reunion with his family, the relief and release after so many years of detention and separation. It was, said his daughter Alika, happiness in one picture. Their years of detention ended yesterday when they were finally allowed to fly home, freed by the Iranian authorities who'd held them hostage as diplomatic pawns. They arrived at RAF Bryce Norton in Oxfordshire in the early hours in good spirits as their families watched and waited. Is that Mummy? Gabriella asks.
Mummy!
That's Mummy.
Yes, it was. There with the families was the Foreign Secretary, whose diplomats and money had helped secure their release.
I think it's been a really difficult 48 hours, the expectation that they would be released, but we weren't sure and right until the last minute. So it's been very emotional, but also a really happy moment for the family.
And for Gabriella, a moment that was shockingly unfamiliar, when she could finally be together with both her parents, the first time in almost 6 years.
Her last birthday party, Mummy rang up and she was showing all her friends that really, I do have a mummy, this is my mummy. And I think bringing Mummy home and showing Mummy off will really validate Gabriella's insecurities there, knowing that she was right, she does have 2 parents that love her.
For the family, advice about coming to terms with their new life from one who'd walked a similar path.
Everybody in the country who has followed this will be deeply interested and want to see more of them. But it is absolutely essential that after the first exposure, they then take it easy. They then withdraw. And I think Richard has this message. I think he realizes that's important.
Iranian state TV claimed both detainees had been freed on humanitarian grounds, accusing them of being dual national spies, claims they've long denied. But still left in Tehran is London-born Morad Tabaz, a third dual national. The Foreign Office said it would continue to press for his release. But for this family, at least, the start of a new life, together at last.
James Landau reporting. James is here now. James, what does this mean then for Britain's future relationship with Iran?
Well, I think it's too early to say that there's going to be some great renaissance of Britain's relationship with Iran. It's still very difficult. But I think what's happened as a result of these releases is the diplomatic decks have been cleared, if you like. And what that does is it eases the way for other negotiations that are going on, particularly at the moment in Vienna, to try and revive the Iran nuclear deal, as it's called. That deal that collapsed under Donald Trump, essentially where sanctions would be lifted on Iran in return for Iran being allowed to carry on a little bit more of its nuclear activities. And just that deal is hanging in the balance as we speak. Sorting this eases the way. There's a second point, and that's about oil. If relations can get warmer, then Iran might be able to sell some oil. As we know, we need oil on the markets at the moment because of the Ukraine war. The prices are soaring. If we could get a bit of Iranian oil into the market, lifting those sanctions, that mean our prices would come down a bit.
James, thank you very much. That's it from me for the moment. Let's join Rita live in Ukraine.
Well, here in Ukraine, Martine, rescue efforts are taking place to try to find survivors after a theatre was bombed in the besieged city of Mariupol. President Volodymyr Zelensky has accused Russia of deliberately dropping a bomb on the theatre, where hundreds of people were thought to be sheltering in the basement. It's understood to have withstood the blast. Russia has denied carrying out the attack. Our first report today is from our Kyiv correspondent, James Waterhouse.
This has been an attack on the whole of Ukraine and its very future. The way it's resisted Russian forces is the main reason why, still, only one major city has fallen. But the cost of that is growing, and nowhere has paid a bigger price than Mariupol. The southeastern port city is the only location separating advancing Russian troops from the south and east. So for the last fortnight, they've surrounded it and bombarded it. People have been forced underground, where supplies have been extremely limited. Here, around 1,200 people were sheltering in this theatre. Children had even been written in Russian outside to warn attackers from above. But they either didn't care, didn't believe, or didn't see. An image to make everyone fear the worst. Then word that the basement they were in withstood the bomb blast. Casualties appear to be low.
The basement wasn't destroyed, and people, more than 1,000 people who were there, it's mostly women with children, they started to went out, and looks like nobody died.
Moscow's denied the strike, instead blaming so-called Ukrainian nationalists without offering any evidence. Russia's also been accused of continually shelling or attacking routes where temporary ceasefires have been agreed. Humanitarian aid hasn't been able to get in, and people haven't been able to escape.
They are destroying everything, round the clock, and they don't let any humanitarian cargo into our blocked city. For 5 days, Russian troops have not stopped the shelling to prevent the rescue of our people.
In the last few days, though, some grains of hope. 30,000 have made it out, say authorities, but more than 400,000 are still trapped. This is the one Russian advance which hasn't stalled, according to Western officials. Mariupol's resistance is thought to be softening too. The rest of Ukraine will be watching and wondering what it means for them if this city falls. James Waterhouse, BBC News in Kyiv.
The Ukrainian president has accused Russia of building a new wall against freedom in Europe through his invasion of his country. During a video address to the lower house of the German parliament, Volodymyr Zelensky said that sanctions against Moscow were not enough. It comes as UK military intelligence says that Russia's invasion has largely stalled on all fronts. It found that Russian forces have been suffering heavy losses and making minimal progress on land, sea and air in recent days. Our security correspondent Gordon Carrera has the latest.
Outside the western city of Lviv, Ukrainian territorial defence forces are training for the battles ahead. So far, Ukrainian troops have surprised many by holding back the Russian advance. And on the diplomatic front, their leader, President Zelensky, continued his virtual tour, speaking remotely to the German parliament. At times critical of Germany's past position on Russia, he called for more action now.
It's a wall in Central Europe between freedom and bondage, and this wall is growing bigger with every bomb on Ukraine, with every decision that is not made for the sake of peace.
Vladimir Zelensky, Slava Ukraina!
Yesterday he addressed the US Congress. He received no promises of the no-fly zone he asked for, but did get significant new military aid, including air defence and drones to target Russian forces. And President Biden went so far as calling Russia's leader a war criminal.
Oh, I think he is a war criminal.
A move the Kremlin denounced angrily as being unacceptable. Today, Vladimir Putin did appear in public, but only to talk about economic development in Crimea as the anniversary of its annexation from Ukraine approaches, making little reference to international pressure or the military campaign. So what's the situation on the ground? Well, the Russian advance had come from three directions: from the east, from the south, and from the northwest towards the capital. But each of those looks to have either stalled or just made slow progress. Now, it does look as if Russian forces have been trying to regroup and encircle the capital, Kyiv, here. But so far, they've not gone in. That might be because they lack the combat power after taking heavy casualties. The US reckons at least 7,000 Russian troops have been killed. Russia continues to claim its forces are making progress, and it's saying negotiations are also moving forward amid talk of neutrality and security guarantees for Ukraine. But other Russian demands for territory may be far less acceptable, and many in Ukraine fear that negotiations are really just cover to allow the Russian military to regroup. Gordon Carrera, BBC News.
Well, refugees have continued to flee war-torn Ukraine. Its neighbour Poland has received by far the largest number of displaced people. And the number crossing into the country is expected to reach 2 million this afternoon. As you can see here, Romania has also been taking in a large number of refugees. Our correspondent Nick Thorpe is on the Romanian border and sent this report.
Refugees from Ismail in Ukraine arrive by boat at Isaacea, biblical names, from Ishmael to Isaac. Most come from cities along Ukraine's Black Sea coast, especially Odessa. On dry land, the Romanian Fire Brigade are the first to help. It's amazingly well organised. Taking shelter from the easterly wind, a mother and the youngest new arrival. Baby David is 10 days old, born in Odessa on the 5th of March. He has 2 older brothers and a sister, Anastasia. Their mother, Anna, is quiet and focused in the midst of the tumult. It was not an easy birth.
I just had given birth to my baby and wanted to leave a maternity hospital, but just then the siren sounded. They told me to sit in the corridor between 2 walls until the alarm was over. I asked the doctor, why would they bomb a hospital? Can't they see the Red Cross on the roof? He replied, listen, we have to be prepared for everything. It's happened elsewhere. We know no limits. I don't know what awaits us, where we can hide, where we would be safe, and I pray to God to end this war as soon as possible.
Alexander is the grandfather, shepherding his family to safety. I brought so much luggage for the children, Anna told me I forgot to pack my own clothes. There's a bus to catch and documents to prepare. She's already talking to the family who will host them in another country. Passport control.
Anastasia? Hello, Anastasia.
Crossing the border between 2 worlds. From here, a bus will take Anna, Alexander and the 4 children to Varna in Bulgaria, further round the Black Sea coast. As Russian military pressure on southern Ukraine increases, so does the exodus. Nick Thorpe, BBC News, Izakcha.
Let's speak now to our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, who's in Kyiv for us now. And Lise, where do things now stand in this conflict?
Well, I think we have to highlight that this war, now in its 4th week, has a human toll that is absolutely staggering at a speed and scale that no one expected, most of all Ukrainians. As you just heard from a refugee who's crossed over into Hungary, nowhere is safe anymore. Not children sheltering in a theatre in Mariupol, not people queuing for bread in the north, not people living in high-rise apartment blocks here on the northwestern edges of Kyiv and in many other cities. Homes and lives are being shattered every single day, and that's the reason why today in New York the UN Security Council will hold a special session to focus on the humanitarian catastrophe unfolding here. There's certain to be another call for an end to this war, but here on the ground the focus in terms of humanitarian relief is on trying to rescue people trapped by the shelling. There are 9 corridors that are going to be opened from 9 cities, including besieged Mariupol. And what we have seen in recent days is that tens of thousands of people in different locations around the country are escaping, but hundreds of thousands more are still trapped and living in desperate conditions.
And Lise, while this goes on, the peace talks continue. How do you assess their chances of success?
It's very difficult now to know how close they are. What we do know is that they are inching towards something, some kind of a plan. Both the Russian and the Ukrainian negotiators speak of a document that they're working on. Even Sergei Lavrov yesterday, the very tough veteran foreign minister of Russia, spoke of concrete words that could be agreed. But in that detail, there are thick red lines for both sides. The Financial Times had this report about a 15-point plan, which centers on Ukraine renouncing its ambition to join the NATO military alliance. I think Ukraine has generally accepted that, but it needs security guarantees in return, and it's not clear what would be acceptable to Ukraine and Russia. And what about the territory that Russia has taken and still wants to take? There are still huge issues, not just at the table, but most of all here on the ground.
Lise, many thanks. Lise Doucette reporting from Kyiv. Well, here in the west of Ukraine, from where I've been reporting for the last 2 weeks, the situation remains relatively calm. But still, there are nightly air raid sirens, there are roadblocks, sandbags and boarded up windows, all signs that nothing anywhere in this embattled country is normal at all. Well, that is all from me and the team here in Lviv. Now it's back to Martine in the studio in London.
Rita, thank you very much. Later today, the government will publish the long-awaited online safety bill. From hate speech to fraudulent adverts, revenge porn to child abuse material, ministers say it will bring an end to big tech regulating itself and for the first time impose a duty of care on platforms. But some critics fear it could pose a threat to privacy and freedom of speech. Angus Crawford reports.
Overwhelmed, quite nervous, shocked, mostly just confused about why it had happened to me. I was quite taken aback.
Sophie can't forget the day a total stranger sent her obscene images.
It was really scary because I didn't know kind of what he wanted, what was going to happen next, and yeah, it was very unnerving.
But now the online safety bill will make so-called cyber-flashing a criminal offence for the first time.
It's almost like a relief. I've spoken to so many women over the past couple of years that, you mention the story and they're like, oh, well, that happened to my sister, that happened to my friend. It's like younger women and girls who are growing up with this and it being normalised for them, that this type of harassment is just happening. So I think it's a really good thing if it goes through.
The new law is broad in scope, covering everything from hate speech to fake adverts, pro-suicide content and terrorist material. At its heart, the bill aims to create a new relationship between us and big tech, where, by law, Platforms owe a duty of care to all users, especially children. That's thanks in part to outrage at the death of Molly Russell. The teenager took her own life after viewing huge amounts of material about suicide and self-harm. Companies will need to shield children from legal but harmful content. Adults gain similar protections, and platforms will need to actively search out illegal material, with the threat of multi-million-pound fines if they don't.
It might well not achieve what it sets out to achieve.
But that has privacy and freedom of speech campaigners worried.
I think it's going to end up not protecting a lot of vulnerable people. I think it's going to undermine protection for people like whistleblowers, for vulnerable adults, for people whose safety depends on being able to communicate confidentially.
Preventing harm, protecting free speech and reining in the tech companies. A complex bill with a difficult balance to strike. Angus Crawford, BBC News.
P&O Ferries says it's providing some 800 staff with immediate severance notices. It says it will be compensating them for this lack of advance notice. The ferry operator said it was not going into liquidation, but all ferries had been instructed to stay in port. As a result, some sailings scheduled for today have been cancelled, with passengers told to use other companies. Our transport correspondent Katie Austin is in Dover. We can join her now. Katie.
Yes, in the last few minutes, P&O Ferries has confirmed that 800 crew are being made redundant. Earlier, the RNT union had urged the firm to protect jobs amid speculation that hundreds of crew members would lose their jobs and be replaced by foreign labour. Unions are advising their members at the moment to stay on board those ships. P&O operates on a number of key routes from the UK, including the Dover-Calais crossing. It was very badly hit financially during the pandemic, affected by a drop in demand, and I've got part of a statement P&O has released in the last few minutes saying it's not a viable business. We made £100 million loss, it said, which has been covered by its parent company DP World. It says this is not sustainable and its survival is dependent on making swift and significant changes now, and without these changes, it says, there is no future for P&O Ferries. Well, earlier a spokesperson said all ships were being asked to stay in port in preparation for a major company announcement. Services are not running for the moment, and passengers are being directed, or customers are being directed, to alternative ferry operators. Well, the Transport Secretary Grant Shapps said this lunchtime he was very concerned and that he would be speaking to the company today to understand the impact on workers and passengers.
Katie, thank you very much. Katie Austin. The Bank of England has raised interest rates from 0.5% to 0.75%. It's the third month in a row that rates have gone up as the Bank of England tries to calm the rise in the cost of living. Our economics correspondent Andy Verity is outside the Bank of England. Andy, this isn't much of a surprise, is it?
Well, no, most economists had been predicting that we would get the third consecutive rate rise in a row. It's not a surprise given the current economic context. What the Bank of England policymakers are saying today is that there's been a succession of large shocks to the economy. You already knew about the pandemic, of course, and after the global reopening of the economy, after that pandemic, there was a surge in demand and supply of basic commodities from petrol, oil, gas, to steel and wood, etc. Didn't keep up with that surging demand. And when you don't get supply matching demand, that's when you get price rises. And so we've had inflation all around the world. In the United States, it's 7.9%. The latest measure here was 5.5% on the Consumer Prices Index. But the Bank of England is now predicting that in the second quarter of this year, inflation will get up to 8% at its peak and possibly higher later in the year. So those global inflationary pressures, exacerbated by the war in Ukraine, are certainly likely to see interest rates rise even more, perhaps up to 2% by the end of this year.
Andy, for the moment, thank you. New measures to tackle racial inequality across the UK have been set out by the government. The changes relate to a wide range of sectors, among them education, healthcare, pay and policing. The strategy comes a year after a government commission report concluded that Britain was no longer a country where the system was deliberately rigged against ethnic minorities. Here's our community affairs correspondent, Adina Campbell.
In the weeks following George Floyd's murder in the US 2 years ago, Black Lives Matter protests went global, which led to the British government commissioning an independent report about the impact of racial inequalities in the UK. Today, ministers have responded to that report with a package of measures, including improvements to health, with a new office looking at ethnic disparities and the way data is collected. Employers will also be given guidance about how to address the ethnicity pay gap.
He's actually huge in history.
And in schools, teachers will have the option to use an updated curriculum about Britain's historical past, developed by a new panel of diverse historians.
We are listening, we hear you. We may have different types of solutions to resolve the problem, but that doesn't mean that we're not looking at the issue.
Will this make a difference?
Absolutely. But what we don't want to see is a narrative about the country that makes it look like nothing good has happened, that we haven't had improvements.
This is where thousands of people came together during a Black Lives Matter protest here in Birmingham 2 years ago. And it's the role of the police and the criminal justice system overall which are some of the top priorities in today's government announcements, with more action over the way powers such as stop and search are used, which for many years have disproportionately affected black people in this country. But for local community workers who've already lost confidence in the government, they say these latest measures fall short of real change.
I've been stopped and searched multiple times by police, so I'm just not confident. I've not seen the change that we should have seen in previous years, and in fact I feel like we're getting worse.
Labour says today's measures have failed to deliver meaningful action, and campaigners say the announcement is long overdue.
We're still seeing black and minority communities being affected differently and mistreated in different ways, whether it's a criminal justice system, whether it's in housing, whether it's in education, and that has to change.
The government hopes today's announcement will strengthen its levelling up agenda by reducing racial injustices and creating a fairer society to live in. Adina Campbell, BBC News in Birmingham.
A Russian journalist who protested against the war in Ukraine in a live TV news programme says she's a normal Russian woman who couldn't remain silent on the sidelines. Marina Ovsyannikova, who's an editor at state-controlled Channel 1, was detained, fined and released. She's been speaking to our correspondent in Moscow, Caroline Davis, who began by asking why she wanted to continue to speak out about her protest.
There are lots of conspiracy theories building up about me. That this was a fake, that it was set by the FSB, or the time a project of Western Special Forces. That's why I had to explain to the world what really happened, the fact that I'm just a normal Russian woman, but I couldn't remain indifferent after Russia invaded Ukraine. I knew that if I went to protest in Central Square, I would be arrested like everyone else and thrown into a police van and be put on trial. Half the poster was in Russian, half the poster was in English. I really wanted to show the Western audience that some Russians are against war. As to the Russians, I wanted to show them, you're zombified by this Kremlin propaganda, stop believing it.
You worked at state media for years. Do you have a sense of guilt about that?
I feel, of course, some responsibility lying on me. I was an ordinary cog in the propaganda machine. Until the very last moment, I didn't think about it too much. I was happy with my life, but discontent was piling up. But of course, I feel responsibility.
Tell me a bit about what happened after the protest.
The main interrogation went on for about 14 hours. Nobody believed it was my personal decision. They were coming up with different versions. They suggested it could be conflict at work, relatives who were really angry about Ukraine, or that I was doing it for Western Special Services. They couldn't believe that I had so many objections to the government that I couldn't stay silent.
What do you think your future now holds for you and for your children here in Russia?
It's a hard question because my eldest son said that I have ruined the life of the whole family. Probably he doesn't understand now, but I hope in the future my children will understand this sacrifice was not for nothing. I don't know what the future holds for us.
Marina Ovsyannikova speaking to our correspondent in Moscow, Caroline Davies. The actor Peter Bowles, who starred in the BBC sitcom To the Manor Born, has died of cancer at the age of 85.
It's a multinational operation run on a telex link. It could be here or Timbuktu.
I hear there are some excellent properties in Timbuktu.
Unfortunately, not within hopping distance of London and Paris. You see,
Bowles played self-made businessman Richard de Vere alongside Dame Penelope Keith in the show, which aired from 1979 to 1981. He began his long stage career at the Old Vic Theatre in 1956, with his last appearance in The Exorcist at the Phoenix Theatre at the age of 81. Time to look at the weather forecast. And Chris Fawkes is with us with a picture of Northamptonshire.
Yes, and proof, Martine, if you needed it, that even puddles can be pretty. The early morning sunshine, blue skies reflected beautiful in the still waters of this big puddle, which of course came to us courtesy of the deluge that we had yesterday. Now, across parts of southern England and the Midlands, we had best part of an inch of rain, 24 millimetres there in parts of Dorset. But there's a big change in our weather patterns, and where it has been wet over recent days, the weather's looking largely dry for the next week or so. The change is brought about by this developing big area of high pressure. Come the weekend, quite an intense area of high pressure with a central pressure of around 1,050 hectopascals or millibars, whatever you prefer for your units there. Today, well, we do have a little bit of rain in the forecast. A narrow band of rain is moving across Scotland and Northern Ireland at the moment. It'll bring around about 10 to 15 minutes of rain. That's moving its way into Northern England. A few showers elsewhere. It'll stay quite windy for Western Scotland, gusts about 40 to 50 miles an hour. But across most areas of England and Wales, there'll be lots of sunshine through this afternoon. Temperatures around about 12 to 14 degrees. So it will feel pleasant in the sunshine, given the wind's quite light in the south. Overnight tonight, with that high pressure with us, the skies are going to clear and it'll turn quite cold with a fairly widespread frost across northern areas. The frost is a bit more patchy in the south, but there could be some mist and fog patches developing, particularly around the Welsh Marsh and the Somerset levels as well. So for some, a murky start to Friday morning, but the mist and fog will lift and clear, and we're looking at a lovely day of spring sunshine. Not a lot of cloud around at all. And those temperatures coming up a few degrees. We're looking at highs potentially reaching 15 in Liverpool, Birmingham, Cardiff and a 16 in London. This fine and sunny settled weather looks set to last into the first part of the weekend as well. Now you'll notice the wind's coming in from an easterly direction. That will keep some of these eastern coasts of Scotland and England a little bit fresher, with temperatures for these areas around about 12 degrees or so. But across western areas, it'll become quite mild, 14, 15 degrees Celsius, quite gusty winds for the headlands of Cornwall, but it's across the hills and valleys of Scotland we could see temperatures really start to get boosted, 17, maybe 18 degrees Celsius locally here. Now on Sunday, still largely fine with some sunshine across western areas. There's a tendency for more cloud to fill in across eastern areas with some showers pushing into eastern England. There could be even a little bit of soft hail mixed in with some of those, and those temperatures just coming down, so it will be slightly cooler with highs of around 10 to 12 degrees. But the weather set fair at least for quite a while yet. Martine.
I'm still stuck on hectopascals. Chris, thank you very much. That's all from BBC News at 1, so it's goodbye from me, and on BBC One we can now join the BBC's news teams where you are.